West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
So, when you consider the breaking news about these criminal referrals, on top of Republicans' poor performance in the midterms, and on top of the now infamous Mar-a-Lago dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes, and on top of the mountain of other BS Donald Trump has dragged the GOP through, you might think to yourself, they're finally going to be done with him. Not so fast, Grasshopper. Last week, I sat down with Politico to explain why I think the Republican Party just can't seem to quit the guy. They just can't get over Trump. And it's not just Trump, but it's also his loyalists like Ronna McDaniel, even after they've lost big at the ballot box. And that's because from the national level down to the state party organizations, it's the MAGA strain of republicanism that's become dominant. It's now standard practice in the GOP to change the rules, to work to overturn elections, to call an insurrection of political discourse. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon until Republicans, well, start acting like Republicans again and get tired of losing. Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Annie Kuster of New Hampshire. She's chair-elect of the New Democrat Coalition. Welcome, Congresswoman. It's good to see you.
Great to be with you, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to get your reaction to the breaking news on the January 6th committee. What do you make of the recommended charges and that they're proposing against Donald Trump? And do you see an impact from all of this?
Well, first, I want to say I was a victim, a witness, and a survivor of the January 6th insurrection. I was in the gallery in the House of Representatives and one of the last to be evacuated. So I'm so grateful to our colleagues for everything that they did. Hours and hours and hours of painstaking work, thousands of depositions, getting to the bottom of this case, and now they're ready to make their referrals. And I think the American people will respond. Certainly, the hearings that they had last July had a big impact on the results of the election in November. The voters rejected Republican extremism, and what they're looking for is more of a mainstream approach. And so that's why I'm proud to be leading the New Democrat Coalition. We're the ones that will get the job done and work with reasonable Republicans to move our country forward.
What do you make of the possible ethics violations for members of Congress? Is that an appropriate recommendation for their failure to comply with subpoenas?
Absolutely. You know, as members of Congress, we take an oath to abide by the law. The subpoenas were lawful. They were instructing members of Congress to provide documents and testimony. They were ignored, and I think it's perfectly appropriate for our Ethics Committee.
I want to get your take on this current strain of the GOP. You heard my take on it. In my view, the MAGA strain, for example, has become dominant, and it seems the only way that's going to change is if Republicans keep losing for a while. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's what we saw here in New Hampshire. We had a resoundingly successful election, 2 House seats. I won by 12 points, Chris Pappas by 8 points, Maggie Hassan for U.S. Senate by 10 points. The voters here rejected our extreme Republican opponents, who were all 3 Trump Republicans, and they are very, very clear that they want people to take a much more proactive approach to working across the aisle and to solving America's serious problems. And I look forward to doing that in the 118th Congress. I've already reached out to my counterpart, Dave Joyce. And as I say, as the leader of the new Democrat coalition, we're the can-do caucus, and we're the ones that will get the job done. Right now, we're working frantically the last few days of the session here to pass major bipartisan mental health and addiction legislation. That passed the House 420 to 20. So, 400 to 20, excuse me. And so, we want to make sure that we do come together. Another example, Michael, is the NDAA, the defense authorization. 350 members, 176 Republicans, 174 Democrats came together to pass that bill. And so that's what the American people want. They want us to work together and get the job done. And they're ready to reject this extremism from the MAGA Republicans.
You've referenced your newly elected role as leader of the new Democrat coalition, that can-do caucus. How do you see that caucus working with Republicans in the House? How do you brand that caucus's work outside of the Congress so that the American people can get behind that can-do attitude and actually push, which I think they should, to get the Congress to actually accomplish something in the next session?
Well, thank you. It's conversations like this, telling people we are 96 Democrats. We are from those purple districts where we defeated MAGA Republicans, 22 frontline members who were in tough districts that made it back are new Democrats, and 17 brand new members of Congress for the 118th who are new Democrats as well. And 7 of those flip seats, these are new Democratic members. So we are the ones that will bring back the majority for Democrats in 2024. But in the meantime, we'll work with anyone or stand up to anyone as is necessary. And there's any number of issues. We're already working with Republicans on immigration reform. We've got a bill about farm workers. I work on immigration and also climate change with a colleague from Utah as co-chairs of the bipartisan ski caucus. So we look for any opportunity to find common ground. I mentioned mental health and addiction, climate. So all of these issues, and of course we have the Farm Bill coming up, and that's a very bipartisan process. And I serve on the Agriculture Committee as well, and look forward to that process.
Well, I appreciate that ski caucus. You gotta get that ski on. But before I let you go, I want to get a little bit more into the political weeds a bit, and get your thoughts on the possible shakeup of the Democratic Party primary calendar ahead of 2024. President Biden's plan would strip New Hampshire of its first-in-the-nation primary status. I have to admit, I'm going to tell you, I'm straight up biased about this. I applaud this. I've been for some time now, even as national chairman, advocating these types of changes to our primary system, which I think has grown stagnant and actually foments a lot of the extremism. But that's me, not you. What can you tell us about your thoughts on this, and what is the case to be made for keeping the system the way it is?
Well, I'm not opposed to change, Michael, and I think you know that Iowa will drop out of the first caucus spot. What I think is it's a complex puzzle with a simple solution. It's not an either or, it's a both and solution. And what that's about is that, of course, we want to lean in and welcome the participation of Black voters and Latino voters to our process and make sure they get heard early in the process. But I continue to believe that New Hampshire has a unique position. We're a small state. You don't have to be wealthy or famous to run for president here. You can have normal conversations with hairdressers and truck drivers and teachers and police, just people in diners and town halls all across the state. And I think it served us well. Just look at Jimmy Carter or Barack Obama. I was on the Barack Obama campaign. He used to tease me before Michelle was on board. And he went to those town hall meetings, talked to voters in their living rooms, and I think he improved as a candidate. And I've said to President Biden, look, I'm a big fan. He's just had an extraordinary 2-year session of Congress and everything that he's done for the American people. I told him, come to New Hampshire. You will win handily. You will clear the field. And so he has nothing to be afraid of. And I think New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, 1, 2, 3, would serve our party very, very well.
It is Monday, the 19th of December of 2022. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Okay, what's my tagline? Well, for today, that's it. How are you? It was another one of those weekends, wasn't it? The Bird app is going through its, I don't know, what is it? Some sort of throes. It's in the throes of something. But, it looked like the assassination coordinates that Ellen, I like to call him Ellen instead of Elon, that Ellen had posted himself at the World Cup. Kushner and his, I like to call them his bone saw investors. That's what they do. They were all there at the World Cup, and they weren't there for the World Cup. They were there for a little tete-a-tete. Now, Ellen didn't bring family to the World Cup. Normally, if you're there to watch the World Cup, you bring a few of your friends and family. Nope. It was just Jared and the Bonesaw Financial Investment Group. And apparently it didn't go well for Ellen. So we'll see. I don't think he's stepping down as CEO. He's certainly not stepping down as owner. Yep. And once again, I want to just reiterate. We have to stop with this lie that Elon Musk was the founder of any company. He buys companies and then pretends that he has invented whatever it is that he's bought. He doesn't have a degree in physics. All right. There's a whole scandal surrounding his educational trajectory. And by all evidence, he probably should have not been, in the country, let alone becoming what I guess he's now the second richest man in the world. He was first. But it looks like, irrational, knee-jerk, libertarian, neo-Nazi fascism just doesn't work. Not in the minds of the people who have to put up with it. When will they learn? Never, apparently. Just keeps happening over and over and over. Jeez. I don't know. Are they the ones that got here from Mars? Because there wasn't an indigenous group of life forms here before these specks of rock came from Mars with a little bacteria that grew into whatever it is that's existing now, and I can tell you what it is. Some sort of virus. Some sort. Well, I think Clifford D. Seamack might have addressed that particular issue. I'm sure he did. But we might as well bring it up anyway. You just never know, panspermia. You get that kind of stuff going on. Next thing you know, you got Carrie Lake. Is that really a humanoid form? I think it came from another planet and sort of, I don't know, evolved. Or I don't know, maybe the dinosaurs didn't go extinct. They just learned to survive by adopting a different kind of outlook on life. Not really a different outlook on life. I wish they had. Because it certainly seems reptilian, the responses that they all have. Old Donnie Trump, those NFTs, no effing thing. I keep saying that. An NFT from Trump is no effing thing. Stole them. Stole the images. This is just all Donald Trump as one total grift. Is this the thing that actually is the tipping point, as they like to say? I hate saying it, but I'll say it now. Is this the tipping point for all of those, I don't know, I like to call them maggots. And if I'm really in a peak, I might even call them deplorable maggots. That's exactly what they are. That's actually the full title, Deplorable Maggot. And are they now finally figuring out that they've been rubes? I got to tell you, usually when rubes find out they've been rubes, they keep it under their hat a little bit. We'll see how this group works out. These caravan of Trump flag flying fools. How's that for a little bit of coincidence, huh? Okay, so it is Monday, and oh boy, we're in the holiday season, as they say. And is there a let up in, I don't know, war and everything else? No peace on earth this season. Has there ever been? Well, it's a nice dream to hold on to, peace on earth. So maybe we can still try to achieve a little bit of peace in this constant din. Yeah, it's constant. The background noise of existence. Okay, we could get philosophical, or we could, I don't know, is that philosophical? It's too early in the morning. I need more coffee. Speaking of which, they're really making it sound like we might be losing coffee as, a thing. They can't do that. They can't do that. And Postum ain't going to work. That's how old we are. Postum. If you know what Postum is, you got to be of a certain age. Not to say that I've ever had any chicory coffee. I have, actually. Doesn't really have the punch one needs. It really doesn't. Even as a placebo, it just doesn't work. No Postum for me. All right. Well, maybe we'll have rioting in the streets to stop climate change then. No one takes my coffee. Not even the climate. Yeah, well, we could have mitigated that problem, a few decades ago, if not generations. But no one ever wants to do anything until it's practically too late. Nah, they never wait until it's practically too late. They wait until it's actually too late. Here we are. Okay. The dinosaurs are said to have, they had no control over what they were doing in their environment. So how different then are we? Apparently. All right. What do we have in store for you for this fabulous River City Hash Mondays, though? I like to call it we're in the period that is now called the 12 assassination coordinates of Christmas. And since it's Hanukkah also, maybe I should just call it the holidays. The 12 assassination coordinates of the holidays. Jing-a-ling-a-ling. Well, what gifts do we have for you in store today? Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, Oregon has appointed its first Laotian judge in the United States. Can you believe that? I mean, Vietnam was a long time ago, and this is the first time. All right, I'm just saying. The mayor of Reno, Nevada, filed suit after finding a tracking device on her vehicle. And the Iowa Democratic Party chair will step down in the wake of a vote by the National Party to put the South Carolina primary ahead of the Iowa caucuses. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Moldova suspended 6 TV channels over broadcasting misinformation from Russian media. And the Transportation Security Agency has been discovering a record number of guns on passengers at airline checkpoints. And guess what? Most of them were loaded. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And I know this is a broken record, but here we go. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and maybe send us once a month what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink. If you could do that, that really helps us pay our bills, and we would really appreciate that. And thank you to those of you who have done so. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter while we still can. I don't know, maybe we will. We'll all be able to anyway. We'll see. You can do that by going to @Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And Tom did set up a Mastodon account for the station at Netroots Radio. And I'll give you the full Mastodon address. I don't have it in front of me right now. It's still new, and I am going to get an account myself up over there, and we'll link up to that same server, I think, and go from there. But it was looking pretty iffy with all these threats of any kind of link, to another, like to Facebook. If you were trying to promote like your work on many platforms and you were telling people how they could find that work, if you mentioned another platform, you're out. You're out of there. Out of there. Boy, and this guy wants to develop Neuralink. Get some sort of thing right in your brain. No way. What's it going to do? Make you run at high speed into a wall and blow up? I think they have their designs a little, it's not well designed. Anyway, enough of that. But I'll give you more of our Mastodon experience and whatever they call it, impression. I can't remember. Anyway, moving on. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, do so. I'm still there, and we will still be there too. We're not going to give up our accounts unless they kick us out. But right now, we're going to go ahead and just expand the reach. That's what we do. That's what everyone should do. Anyway, follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Coast 10 minutes before showtime and post that so that you can then look at the real articles that we are referring to in our newsread, however that becomes. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And I guess I got to set up a Mastodon account for the show too. Well, we will. I think we can do that. Anyway, find the show at Cookbook West on Twitter and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Oh, iTunes, YouTube, iTunes, everything out there. Deezer, Cast. They even have like a podcast place that you can get podcasts called Cast. Oh, before I forget as well, I was going through those who have been getting podcasts that somehow gets counted by Spreaker, and we have some listeners in Ukraine. So welcome. Just thank you very, very, very much for listening. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is from Austin de Dios from the Oregonian. Shanpon Sinapalise's family fed the war-torn country of Laos when she was 4 years old. She spent the months before arriving in the United States in a refugee camp in Thailand, sleeping in the dirt with little food and severely sick. Now, 40 years later, she sits on the Multnomah County Circuit Court as the first ethnic Lao judge in the United States. Sina Pase was appointed in September of 2021, but celebrated her investiture in October of this year with family and friends, solidifying her spot as the first Laotian judge in the country. There have been Hmong judges appointed in the past, but she is the first judge to identify as Laotian. The Hmong people are an ethnic group within Laos, a Southeast Asian country bordering Thailand. In 2013, Judge Pa Lo was appointed in California as the first Hmong American judge in U.S. history. Before Sinla Pase's appointment to the bench, she spent her 20-year legal career serving refugees, immigrants, and diverse communities in times of crises, helping them navigate the same challenges her family did. I came to America as a refugee, as a young child, leaving war with my family, and that lens really helped me understand the process of trying to integrate into the United States system, she said. Sinla Pase and her family fed the communist takeover of Laos around 1979, spending 18 months in a refugee camp in Thailand before coming to the United States. They slept on dirt floors, eating what little food the camp could provide. Sinla Pase got very sick during her time in the camp, but without the help of an American doctor, she said she might have died. Her family was greeted with long lines in immigration, language barriers which required her parents to find interpreters, and a myriad of government programs that are often difficult to navigate for people coming into the country. She remembers the feeling all too well. Despite the culture shock, her family settled in with help from social workers and the Refugee Resettlement Program. Her path to the judiciary was built on lowering barriers, she said. People coming to the court, all their fears, their reservations, their calls dropping or not being able to afford a phone to check in, our houseless population, these are all access points or barriers for other people, she said. I have lived that experience of living through poverty and living through those barriers of access. The refugee-turned-lawyer moved to Oregon from California in 1999 to attend Lewis and Clark Law School. She worked with Catholic Charities as an anti-human trafficking attorney for about 4 years before starting her own practice with partners. Sinla Pase was not planning to pursue a seat on the bench until her mentors encouraged her to apply in 2016. They told her she'd bring a unique and needed perspective to the court. Federal litigation and policy during Donald Trump's presidency, including The executive order that barred citizens from several Middle Eastern countries and refugees fueled the fire further. It made a profound impact on how I valued my service as a person with a legal degree, she said. Despite nearly 2 decades of law experience, she still had her doubts about becoming a judge. I did not believe in myself. Like all people, you second-guess your ability, your place, and where you can be best valued. She is one of the few judges to be appointed on her first application, she said. The interview process started at the beginning of 2017, and Sinla Pasay described it as the longest time period of her life. Now she wants to use her time on the bench to mend the perception of the justice system and to provide equal access to legal services for diverse and low-income communities. Gabe Stern of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Reno Mayor Hillary Sheev is suing a private investigator and his company after finding a device attached to her vehicle that was capable of tracking its real-time location. The lawsuit, first reported by the Nevada Independent, alleges that the investigator trespassed on her property to install the device without her consent. It says Sheev was unaware until a mechanic noticed it while working on her vehicle. The complaint says further that the investigator was working on behalf of an unidentified third party whose identity she has not been able to ascertain. The tracking and surveillance of Sheev caused her, as it would cause any reasonable person, significant fear and distress, it reads. There was no immediate response to a request for comment by the Associated Press to David McNeely. The investigator alleged to have placed the tracking device, and 5 Alpha Industries, the company. Sheev, who filed the lawsuit in Washoe County's 2nd Judicial Court as a private citizen, was elected last month to her 3rd term as mayor, a position she has held since 2014. She is seeking restitution for invasion of privacy, trespassing, civil conspiracy, and negligence, as well as attorney's cost. She is also seeking to know who hired the investigator. The mayor said in an interview with the Nevada Independent that the mechanic found the tracking device about 2 weeks before the vote. She brought it to police in neighboring Sparks, and they were able to determine that it had been purchased by McNeely. A spokesperson for the mayor said she went to the Sparks department rather than Reno police in order to keep clear of any conflict of interest questions. The complaint also alleges, without offering additional evidence, that the company installed similar tracking devices on other vehicles of multiple other prominent community members. Associated Press staff brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's River City Ash Mondays. The head of the Iowa Democratic Party will not seek re-election in the wake of a vote by the National Party to put the South Carolina primary ahead of Iowa's caucuses, which have long been the first presidential nominating contest in the country. Ross Wilborn announced on Saturday that he won't run for re-election as party chairman in January. No one can predict the future, but I have the utmost faith that whoever takes up the mantle next will guide our party with grace through the challenges ahead, as we all continue to work on growing our party and electing Democrats who will fight for the ideas we know are supported by a strong majority of Iowans, Wilborn said in a statement. In addition to losing their first-in-the-nation status, Democrats in Iowa lost several key races in the state last month as Governor Kim Reynolds and U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley cruised to re-election, and two longtime Democratic office holders lost their positions. The next chairman will lead Iowa Democrats as they decide whether to comply with the National Party's decision or follow a state law that requires the caucuses to be held at least 8 days before any other presidential nominating contest. If the state party does not go along with the National Party's decision, Iowa Democrats will run the risk that its delegates will not count toward the national nominating total. Wilborn, who was the party's first black chairman, will remain a state representative. All right, well, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, good for dieting. As we know, growing up's not easy. However, growing up while having an uncontrollable desire to devour human flesh is arguably even harder, which is basically the storyline in director Luca Guadagnino's latest. Set in the late 80s, Bones and All tells the story of Marin, Taylor Russell, who finds herself on her own after her only parent abandons her shortly after her 18th birthday. As we learn from a tape he leaves her by way of explanation, her father learned about her cravings at a young age and hoped in vain that she'd grow out of it. Armed only with her birth certificate, Marin is determined to track down her long-estranged mother, whom she suspects may suffer from the same affliction. On the way from Virginia to Minnesota to meet her, she encounters two other cannibals, the creepy Sully, played to a T by Mark Rylance at his best, and Lee, a troubled young man who becomes her boyfriend. As Marin learns, cannibals vary in their approach to sating their hunger. Sully claims he only feasts on the dead or dying, whereas Lee, played by Timothée Chalamet, feeds randomly. However, the one thing they all share is that they and most of their victims live on the fringes of society, which would condemn their actions if they were noticed. With this in mind, it's easy to see their cannibalism as a metaphor for marginalization, and why the film is set in Reagan's America, a time of homophobia, AIDS, and a culture where appearances of normality matter more than individual happiness. Superimpose the coming-of-age story, and it's easy to see why some have dubbed this one as an alternative Romeo and Juliet. Some additional character development could have helped, and maybe some editing of the gore, but Bones and All is nonetheless a hearty and original tale. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. In September, a massive storm on Alaska's west coast brought a surge of water 17 miles inland from the Bering Sea to the Chupik village of Chivak.
The storm was crazy.
What was crazy about it?
It flooded down there. It was like a sea, but
it was like a ocean.
Some powers turned out, and some people had to sleep at the school for 3 days.
Just over 900 people live in this community. It sits on a high bank above the Ninglakfak River. Elder John Pengayak says the storm shook his resolve.
For 3 days I was in turmoil because I finally realized how dangerous our situation here in western Alaska is vulnerable from very high winds and water surge.
The impact of the storm, called Merbok, is very real for thousands of rural residents in western Alaska. Dozens of villages saw some level of flooding. People lost power, causing chest freezers to defrost. The power outages destroyed months of subsistence food that people spent their summers storing up. Food security in this part of the state is precarious, and on top of defrosted freezers, nearly all of the 90 or so boats people use to go fishing and hunting for their main sources of food in Chivak were damaged or destroyed. Pengayak says the losses are devastating.
It's our survival.
Yeah.
If I'm a Chupik, subsistence is mine. That's me. That's subsistence is me. Because I'm the one that's going out and fishing. I'm the one that's going out and hunting for my family. And we do it for livelihood and survival.
When the flood came in, it filled up with water, and then it drifted over and sunk right on the river channel.
Clinton Slats was in Chivak's community hall days after the storm to report his losses to 2 employees who the village's tribal council had hired to take reports on the damage. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to retrieve his boat from the bottom of the Ninglakfak River.
Hard to put into words how it impacts. It's just, I have no way to go hunt and gather with the remainder of the season by boat.
The storm didn't just destroy boats and motors. Nearly a dozen fishing sheds that held all sorts of gear, from rifles to nets to gas cans and rain gear, were destroyed. Some had completely disappeared from the riverbank. Elsewhere across Alaska, summer fish camps and hunting cabins were destroyed. And because the storm arrived in Alaska before the ground was frozen, coastal erosion was extreme.
And so, of course, it's much easier to erode material that doesn't even have any ice in there to help stabilize it even a little, as compared to the same storm, say, now, where things have started to freeze up.
That's Rick Toman, a climate specialist at the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
But the warming oceans contribute to that longer period of time before freeze-up gets going. And that, again, is something that is sure to continue into the future.
He says conditions this year in the South Pacific were ripe for the development of a storm like Merbok.
Historically, the waters in that part of the subtropical Pacific are just not warm enough to support typhoon development. But this year, the much of the subtropical Pacific east of Japan is far warmer than normal. Some areas the warmest on record.
This storm was rare. Alaska hasn't seen anything like it in 50 years. Dozens of rural communities saw infrastructure damage in addition to flooding. Many scientists, including Toman, believe the storm, which originated as a typhoon in the northwestern Pacific, is a harbinger of what climate change could bring to the northernmost U.S. state in coming years.
Certainly we know a big contributor to the increased impacts isn't that there are more storms, but rather storms are coming when there's no sea ice.
As the coldest months of winter bear down on Alaska, there's still currently no significant shore-fast sea ice along Alaska's Bering Sea coast or further north along the shoreline of the southern Chukchi Sea, other than around the mouths of rivers. It's a phenomenon that's become the norm in recent years.
In the 20th century, there would have been sea ice to offer protection or act as a buffer or a wave break. And with that gone, the impacts have increased.
After Merbok developed as a powerful typhoon, it made its way north and east toward Alaska. As it did so, it grew into something meteorologists really don't even have a word for. Some people called it the remnants of a typhoon. Toman referred to it as an ex-typhoon. But that kind of language doesn't do justice to describe its power or immensity. By the time it slammed into Alaska, it had tripled in size alone.
Over the long term, there's not any good hard evidence that the intensity of these storms is increasing, but the background that they're working in, a warmer environment, a less frozen environment, is really, I think, the driver of the impacts.
Residents in dozens of western Alaskan communities continue to repair damaged homes and outbuildings and to apply for disaster assistance through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the state government, and other organizations. What Merbok laid bare is their vulnerability and the extreme need for improved and strengthened infrastructure as such storms become the new normal in the region. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
What does a town bylaw that permits going topless on the beaches teach us about democracy? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In May 2022, Nantucket, Massachusetts passed the Gender Equality on Beaches bylaw. That bylaw does exactly what its name indicates. It allows everyone to go topless on the beaches in that town if they want to. Of course, anyone can wear a top, and everyone is on notice that some people on the beach, regardless of gender, may not be wearing a top. In Massachusetts, new town bylaws are subject to review by the state attorney general to determine if they comply with the state constitution and state law. In early December, the Massachusetts attorney general ruled that the bylaw legally was just fine. As the longtime town resident who proposed the bylaw explained, this is righting a wrong, allowing the space for all bodies to be topless and catching up to what was already legal for men. But it wasn't always so. Indeed, until the late 1930s, it was a crime in most states and cities for men to go topless, to expose their nipples, even on a beach. A crime for men. Obviously, that changed. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously wrote that in our federal system, states are the laboratories of democracy. Similarly, for states, local governments, as here, can function as laboratories of democracy and equality. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1983. That was the day that a bitter national strike of Greyhound workers came to a close. Nearly 13,000 bus drivers, mechanics, and clerks had gone on strike. They were members of the Amalgamated Transit Union. Contract negotiations had gotten off to a foreboding start that year. The company had demanded deep cuts in both wages and benefits. At the same time, management was set to receive a 10% wage increase. Deregulation in the industry had resulted in a rise of low-fare, non-unionized bus companies. But even with that, Greyhound was still making a profit. ATU members voted overwhelmingly to reject management's proposal. That November, they went out on strike. Greyhound responded by bringing in scab workers to drive the buses. The news media, including Dan Rather at CBS News, reported on the development.
Violence and the threat of violence rode the nation's highways today as Greyhound resumed limited bus service in the midst of a bitter strike. Police listed more than 100 arrests around the country.
In Zanesville, Ohio, bringing in strike breakers led to tragedy. One of these scab drivers plowed his bus through a line of union picketers. One of the strikers, Ray Phillips, was hit and killed. Ray was a steward and former president of his local union. No one was ever held accountable for the killing of Ray Phillips. The strike ended with the workers taking a nearly 8% pay cut. They also lost vacation days and saw a reduction in their benefits. It was another bitter defeat for labor in the same year that saw President Ronald Reagan bust the Air Traffic Controllers Union. From the skies to the roads, American workers were and continue to be under attack. Today's Labor History in 2 brought to you in memory of Carol Hillman, a passionate friend of workers and volunteer of the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 24 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the upper 30s and low 40s. We are under ice fog conditions at the moment and an active stagnation air warning. And we will have cloudy skies today when winds will be light and variable. Partly cloudy in the early evening, then becoming increasingly cloudy over the course of the night. Then after midnight, looks like we may have some light rain. Winds will be light and variable. Lows will be in the upper 20s, so that light rain may be actually light snow. Cloudy tomorrow with occasional light rain. Highs in the mid to upper 30s. Winds light and variable, and it looks like it wants to bring about a 1/4 inch of precipitation. But who knows? Maybe it'll be cold enough to actually get a smattering of snow. We'll look for it. Pollen is still rated as none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is in the moderate range, so those of you with breathing difficulties do take care. The index is at 60 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the low range at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.3 inches. Visibility is at 1.5 miles. And relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 55 degrees with rain showers. Paris is 53 and clear. Rome is 55 and fair. Kyiv is 22 degrees and clear. Kabul is 36 and clear. Hong Kong is 60 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 38 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 58 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 41 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York is 38 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Stephen McGrath and Christian Jardin of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. The broadcast licenses of 6 television channels in Moldova have been suspended over accusations of misinformation, inaccurate coverage of Russia's war in Ukraine, and attempts to manipulate public opinion, authorities said. The decision to revoke the licenses of the channels First in Moldova, RTR Moldova, Accent TV, NTV Moldova, TV6, and Orhai TV were announced on late Friday by Moldova's Commission for Exceptional Situations, which was established after Russia's invasion of neighboring Ukraine. The commission said the suspensions were made after a review of Moldova's Audiovisual Council found a lack of correct information in the coverage of national events, but also of the war in Ukraine. It also said the suspensions aim to prevent the risk of disinformation or attempts to manipulate public opinion. 4 of the 6 suspended channels, First in Moldova, RTR Moldova, NTV Moldova, and TV6, regularly retransmit programs from Russian TV channels that on Friday were banned by the European Council as part of a fresh wave of sanctions against Russia. The banned Russian broadcasters, the EU Council said, are under the direct or indirect control of the leadership of the Russian Federation and have been used by the latter for its continuous and concerted disinformation and war propaganda actions. Moldova, a former Soviet republic of 2.6 million people, is one of Europe's poorest nations. It is struggling with skyrocketing inflation and an energy crisis, including widespread power outages last month after Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy grid, to which Moldova's systems remain connected.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. The federal agency tasked with screening passengers before they get on planes says officers this year have stopped a record number of guns brought by passengers attempting to go through airport security checkpoints. The Transportation Security Administration said in a news release that officers have stopped 6,301 firearms so far this year, and the agency is anticipating that number will rise by 6,600 by the end of the year. That's nearly a 10% increase over last year, which was already a record. Nearly 90% of the weapons caught so far were loaded. The agency considers a weapon to be loaded if the passenger has access to both the gun and the ammunition. In response, the agency said it is increasing the maximum civil penalty for firearms And those violations are going to go to $14,950. Passengers caught with a weapon also lose their TSA pre-check status, and they'll lose that for at least 5 years. Firearms are prohibited in carry-on bags at the checkpoint and on board aircraft. When a passenger brings a firearm to the checkpoint, this consumes significant security resources and poses a potential threat to transportation security, in addition to being very costly for the passenger. TSA Administrator David Pekoski said in the news release. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.